Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm going to dive straight into it. We're talking today about what retail marketers, digital retail marketers, should do about AI right now. And the reason I wanted to run through this is that I think, or I know that many people are being asked by their bosses, by their boards, by their investors to articulate the vision for their companies in this space, but also to put together the plan and come and say, what are we doing? What are we doing now? What are we doing this year? And I'm hoping I can help. I'm hoping that by talking a little bit about some of the different approaches that I've seen and heard about from different marketers, that can be helpful to you. And ultimately, you can copy my homework. And if some of my slides show up in your pitch internally, then yeah, I'm fine with that. Feel free to reuse any of this material to make your case. So let's dive straight into it. There's a couple of things that I wanted to just frame the conversation around from the get-go. The first is that when we talk about what to do about AI, I could be talking about three things. How do we use AI in our own business? What are our competitors doing? And what should we do about that? And what are consumers doing and how are they using AI to make decisions about where to buy from and how to shop? I'm primarily going to be talking about the third one, but just very briefly, how we can use AI. This is not a presentation today about the productivity opportunities, the ways that you can produce content for your own website, or some of the kind of SEO tools that are available that are AI powered. So we're not going to go too deep into any of that. We're also not going to go too deeply into what it means when our competitors start using AI, which in the main part is very similar to the first. The only difference is that they may not be in e-commerce. So when we talk about competitors in SEO, my mind at least has that encompass a broader range of businesses. It's essentially anybody else who might take some of the visibility that we want. So they could be media sites, they could have different business models, affiliates, listings, all kinds of things. They might be doing different things, and there's definitely some risks in here. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about AI slop, which is the stuff that maybe it's not exactly spam, but it may not be high quality or valuable either. But we're not going to go super deep into that either today. What we're going to be focusing on today is grounded in what consumers are doing. And we're kind of following the customer and thinking about what do we need to be doing given what people are doing with these tools in their own lives right now. And so I don't want to also to go too deep into futurology prediction mode. I do have a bit of a tendency to do that, and I do enjoy thinking about that. And I'm personally very excited about where some of this technology is going to be going. But that's not the purpose of today's session. We'll touch a little bit on some kind of fairly short to medium term predictions, but only to guide our current strategy. What we're really doing is we're saying, what should we already be doing? What do we do next? And what should we be right now already planning to do over our planning horizon? And I'm hoping that that's useful to you because I think those are the questions that folks are getting from their bosses. So when you get that email that says, what's our AI SEO plan? I'm hoping that you can copy some of my homework and that it's useful to use some of this material to go from there. If you're joining this stream without having pre-registered, so if you pre-registered and got an email from me, then you will already be on the list to get the recording and the slides afterwards. And the slides have all the links that you can follow, so you can follow all of that material to your heart's content. You don't need to be recording it or taking notes or whatever else. You'll get all of the materials automatically. If you joined the live stream on my Twitter, my LinkedIn, or the Search Pilot YouTube channel, and you haven't pre-registered, then you might want to do that at bit.ly/searchpilot-AI-SEO, or this QR code you can scan with your mobile phone right now. If you fill out that form, again, you'll get the benefit of having the recording and the slides emailed out to you afterwards, as soon as I've got the video uploaded, basically. Okay, I will put that up again at the end if you've missed it. But yeah, and obviously all these links will get tweeted and LinkedIn shared and all the rest of it. Right, let's get into it. So, as I said, today's focus is on how customers are using AI to find things to buy. If we're in retail, we're in e-commerce, that is the billion dollar question. And crucially, what I want to draw from that is what retail marketers should do already, what they should be doing, what they should be planning to do. And we're talking here primarily about, right now, I think, concepts like AI overviews in Google, tools like ChatGPT, and all of the new search competitors, whether it's ChatGPT search, whether it's pure play, Perplexity and the like, all of that kind of area of things. And there's a reason that I've chosen for today's talk to focus on retail, which is that you're in a different position to some other industries. I think a slightly more positive, less complicated relationship, primarily because of this, that the LLMs won't ship people things. So ultimately, if somebody wants to buy something, they have to buy it from you or your competitor. And that's a very familiar place to be. That's the place where we've been in SEO for 20, 25 years. And that is different in other industries. There is a more complicated future ahead for media, for affiliates, for listing sites, and for a whole variety of other industries. But I think if we're talking about e-commerce and retail, then the strategies and tactics are fairly clear, and they're certainly different in those different spaces. And so I want it to be very specific so that this could be as useful as possible. Hopefully it will be. Please do give me feedback afterwards. The easiest way to find me is, well, I'm pretty easy to find in lots of places, but I'm at Will Critchlow on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm on the Threads and Blue Skies and all those kind of places. Or you can find my email address pretty quickly as well. Okay, so what I wanted to do first is that dive straight pretty much to the punchline. Actually, I know that people are here for the tactics and short on time, and if you want to just watch this bit of the presentation and then head off about your day, that's fine as well. So you're here for the tactics, so let's get to those straight away. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle back round to a slightly bigger picture view and hopefully connect all those threads together to back up what I think we should be doing with some of the theoretical underpinnings of that argument, so that if you have to make this case internally, or you're putting a business case together, or you're answering that question from your boss, that you can do it in a well-rounded fashion. But first of all, let's just answer the question. What should we be doing? So right now, step one, we're going to talk about the channels as they exist today and what we should be doing about them. We're then going to talk about what we should already be doing for where we see the channels going in the very short term. And then we're going to talk about some things that we actually can't really quite do just yet, but that I anticipate are likely to be possible in the near future as some of these channels evolve. So first of all, channels as they exist today. The biggest thing, if I could only get one point across in this whole webinar, it would be that the answer for 99% of e-commerce and retail businesses to what is our top priority when it comes to AI as a user acquisition channel right now is that the channel you're talking about is Google. Google is the biggest AI powered marketing channel, and it's not even close. And I'm not just talking about AI overviews and the stuff that looks like LLM discussions in Google. This is not about Gemini. This is not about AI overviews alone. This is about realizing that the whole of Google is AI powered. And we'll talk a little bit about the kind of what that means slightly more academically or theoretically a bit later on. But what I think it means practically is that we need to be running experiments to find out what the machines prefer. And you know that I believe this because I'm putting all my money where my mouth is in building SearchPilot. This is what SearchPilot does. And if this is not a pitch for SearchPilot, but you're interested in talking to us, you know how to find us. But these experiments that we need to run are because the machine-driven channels are looking more and more like they have the complexities of human preferences. And I think probably people are familiar with the idea that for pretty much as long as I've been working with the internet, maybe not quite three-quarters of the time, the way that we've operated when it comes to human preferences is testing, right? And conversion rate optimization, user experience optimization, those disciplines are built on experimentation. And that's because human preferences are complex and there are trade-offs. And when we make a change for a whole big universe of potential customers, Some people are going to like it, some people are going to like it less, and we need to know what the net impact of those things are. And it's exactly the same when it comes to SEO. And my like kind of probably most philosophical argument here is that AI SEO is just SEO. It's just what it is. It's just modern SEO. It's just where the whole industry is going. And so, yeah, if I'm going to get one message across, it's that our AI search plan should start with our Google plan. And my opinion, as I say, I do put my money where my mouth is. My opinion is that it looks like having an experimentation program where we can attribute the outcomes of individual initiatives to those initiatives with some degree of statistical confidence. So that's the big first thing, is that what we should be doing right now is communicating about the fact that our AI search, AI SEO plan starts with Google and starts with modern SEO. And then the next part is that we need to think about the channels that are around the periphery, whether that is Gemini, so still Google, but LLM based, whether it is the effect of AI overviews, whether it is, in fact, completely outside of the Google ecosystem, whether we're talking ChatGPT or Claude or any of these open source models, even, all the things that look more like search. And some of those are very explicitly targeting the search market. So, if I were to summarize the things that I hope people would already be doing is, first of all, testing for Google, the biggest AI search channel, and secondly, monitoring the usage of large language models among your target audience. And just that's kind of a watching brief, seeing how that's going, seeing what's going on there. My view is that right now, doing things specifically designed to do better, be recommended more by the LLMs, for example, as distinct from what you might do in any other channel, whether it be PR, SEO, whatever else, that's going to be a low ROI activity right now. There simply isn't enough volume, and they're not responsive enough to the changes that you might make. There'll be some great experiments. People are going to come up with some all kinds of hacks and tricks, and we're going to see some really interesting kind of red team stuff, I suspect. I, I think that we're going to see some individual affiliates do very well by convincing some of these models to recommend them in all kinds of interesting cases. But I think for big brands, and most of our work these days is with very large retailers. And so we work, for example, with Petco in the US, with Marks and Spencer in the UK. At that kind of multi-billion scale, you're being recommended anyway. And the incremental margin on some of those kind of technical tweaks is pretty small right now. So that's my kind of summary of the right now piece. The tactics are: remember that Google is an AI channel and communicate that way internally. So when people ask for your AI plan, start with Google. Your Google plan should involve testing because it's about machine preferences and they're more complex than they ever used to be. And we can't just rely on checklists and best practices and those kinds of things. We have to treat it like an experimentation program. And let's keep an eye on the emerging technologies. The second pillar of what I want to talk about today is what I've called what comes next. But what I mean is, these are things that if we don't have in place, I think we should start putting in place now. They may not pay off for pure AI recommendation ROI in the short term, but they're low cost, strategically aligned, and probably actually most people are pretty much doing them already. The first one, well, I mean, actually, all of this comes under the category of being visible. And the first one is about a very specific kind of visibility, which is how you allow crawlers to access or disallow crawlers to access your website. And my view here, I mean, my personal view is actually that you probably want to be quite broadly accessible in most industries. That's a little bit more controversial in some spaces than in others. But in e-commerce, I think it's relatively uncontroversial. I think most e-commerce sites and certainly most e-commerce marketers are going to want to have the large language models and the evolution of AI learning about your products, your product content, and everything that all the meta information about that product listing from you. You want them to consume that from your site. You don't want them to only see that on third party sites. So you want to allow those crawlers. in my opinion. And I'm very interested in a conversation or a debate about this if anybody's getting pushback on this or has different opinions. But personally, if it was me and I'm running an e-commerce site, I would align the bot crawling permissions for all of the LLMs with my Googlebot crawling permissions. Anything Googlebot's allowed to see, I think they should be allowed to see. And so the tactical action is to go and see, do you have specific allow directives for Googlebot in your robots.txt file right now? Because if you do, that's a sign that you're probably allowing Googlebot in as a special case and that you're blocking other crawlers. And that might be completely valid. You might be blocking some competitor tools, some market intelligence tools, those kinds of things. Fine, that's up to you. But if you're doing that and you're only letting Googlebot through, Bingbot or whatever, my view is you probably want to add the ability for the LLM bots to crawl as well. And I actually run a little silly side project called realrobotstxt.com. I just realized they didn't put a link in here, but it's a screenshot of it. Realrobotstxt.com, which I'll tweet out, which is a good way of testing how your robots.txt file works for different crawlers. And you can specify the user agent if you need to. And so you can put in there, look up the ChatGPT user agent bot, for example, to see how it's treated right now. So that's tip one. Tip two, less controversial, but perhaps a bigger lift, depending on your site, is that the major LLM crawlers primarily do not execute JavaScript. And so we're back in a world of Googlebot of 10 years ago, where any JavaScript content was, broadly speaking, invisible to the search engines. And although Google has made strides in this area, I still personally prefer to have that content visible in the HTML that's in the original served HTML from the server side. And we've seen various situations where that is actually beneficial. And I think it's going to continue to be because JavaScript execution is expensive, even for Google. And there are certain cases where it's deprioritized or not done as quickly. So I think the broad recommendation is this is a good SEO best practice anyway, but it's even more imperative if you want that content to be present in the LLM training data because they, excuse me, they don't, according to this for self-study, none of these major LLM bot user agents execute JavaScript at all. And so any content that relies on JavaScript is going to be completely invisible to them. And just to reiterate, I think you want them getting this information from you, from the horse's mouth. You want them to know what you have in stock. You want them to know your pricing. You want them to know your users' reviews of the product. You want them to have your language around product descriptions and benefits and the whole brand values around all this stuff. In my view, all of that stuff is net positive for e-commerce in particular, because ultimately, if somebody's going to buy this stuff, they've got to buy it somewhere, and you want it to be from you. Those first two fairly uncontroversial, I think, in e-commerce. The third one is about where you put your content out and your broader content. So not just your PDPs, PLPs, your product information, but marketing copy and long form. And this will vary depending on your industry and your site. It's relatively rare in e-commerce to have registration walls preventing the crawling of this content anyway. This is much more of a B2B SaaS kind of game. But I'm definitely reevaluating it in my own world, is to say, I want more and more of, if I'm putting the effort into producing that content, I actually want it in that training set because I want to have these artificial intelligences, I want them to learn from me. I want them to have got their ideas from my writing. I want them to have embedded my perspective, my thoughts, my language, my words, even if I make up words. I want them, all of that stuff to be embedded in their training data. And I'm inspired here. The reason I've got this screenshot, I'm inspired by Tyler Cowen, who I'm going to link to a video where he gets interviewed. He's normally the interviewer. I listened to a very good interview of him the other day, and he's been changing my mind on, well, changing my mind, really emphasizing the importance of this to me. And what I've taken here is that he wrote this book, The Goat, the greatest economist of all time. And it's an interesting book because he co-wrote it with ChatGPT. That's somewhat interesting, somewhat not. What's much more interesting is that he wants people to consume it via LLM, by asking questions, by interrogating it, by, he's kind of you can read it just as a normal book, but his primary mode of distributing it is as RAG content, so training data, not training data, query time, augmented data for an LLM, so the LLM can answer questions about his book. And he thinks he's going even further in this direction. And his prediction is that his human audience is going to be dwarfed by his agent audience. And I think that's probably quite likely. So anyway, point being, stick to the tactics. Try, you want what you say about your brand and what others say about your brand to be as widely accessible on the internet as possible if you sell real products, I think. Which leads me to my final point, which is this applies to media coverage as well. And a lot of media sites are on the other side of this battle, right? They don't want their point of view chopped up, sliced up, diced and repurposed. They don't want it to be so that you can just go to the LLM of your choice and say, what does the New York Times say about the latest tech innovation? They want it so that you have to go and actually read their content if you want that information. This is the Washington Post robots.txt, or a snippet of the Washington Post robots.txt blocking all of these agents. Now, this no criticism here. The game theory is definitely more complicated for media companies. We should also note that some of them have partnerships, so they may block the public crawler, but they may actually be providing that data in other ways via APIs or other agreements. Some of them are suing some of the LLM producers. This is a bit less tactical, but over the long run, there is definitely going to be benefit to having your brand mentioned and your products mentioned by third parties. This is the equivalent of the offsite stuff in old school SEO of link building, essentially. And I think the future of link building looks more like mentions and recommendations. And those need to be in the form, just like they previously would have had to have been in a no follow was no good. The robots.txt was no good. They had to be crawlable, indexable, etc. I think the same is going to be true. They're going to have to be in a form that can show up in the LLM training data in order to be able to be effective. Once again, that we're starting to edge here into theory. I think the really tactical stuff that I would do right now is audit your own robots.txt and check your reliance on JavaScript. Those two are the key next actions in this be accessible case, I think. So, brief section on the eventually, because this isn't really the point of today's talk. I don't want to do too much futurism and futurology, as I said, but just I think if I were answering this question to senior leadership at large e-commerce site, as I say, I would be starting with the idea that our AI search strategy or our AI recommendation strategy starts with Google, starts with testing, includes accessibility, includes making sure that we're in the training data. And I would say we should be aware that there is a future where these channels become independently interesting. So at the moment, they don't justify it, in my opinion. But we're keeping an eye. One of the actions we're doing is we're keeping an eye on these channels and their usage in their own terms. So how many chats are happening, what's their monthly active users, those kinds of things. More importantly, in their outbound traffic, are they showing up as a source of traffic to our websites? And are we actually seeing meaningful sales volume coming off the back of those recommendations? So when the traffic is big enough, first thing we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to include that traffic in our experiment measurements. So that's where we're saying we measure our experiments on a blended set of Google plus other search engines that are growing to sufficient volume. And then eventually we may be able to even run dedicated AI experiments. So, do we perform better in the LLMs when we, whatever? One bit of controversial discussion I saw today or yesterday was around schema markup. Is schema markup going to make the blind bit of difference to an LLM? No idea. I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer right now. You can make a strong case in either direction, I think. I'm not going to try and go down this rabbit hole today, but we can do that on Twitter if anyone's interested. Point being, these are going to have to be experiments, just like the argument that we make that modern SEO in an AI world requires experimentation. I think the same is going to be true in the fullness of time against the LLM traffic. And the point is, this is difficult, if not impossible, to do today. There just isn't enough freshness in the AI results. If you change something on your website today, it's going to be a long time before that shows up in a difference in recommendations in the LLM output, because it's got to go through not only the crawling pipeline and what used to be the indexing pipeline on Google's side, but it's going to have to go through the training pipeline. And that's super intensive, takes a long time. And so the responsiveness isn't there to enable those tests today. But the argument I'm about to make is that by the time we need to do this, in other words, by the time that traffic has reached sufficient scale that we're interested in it as an independent channel in its own right, that freshness is likely to be there, is probably going to have to be there. And so we're going to be able to run those experiments. So that's the lightning quick journey through the tactics that I think I would be recommending if I were in some of your shoes getting asked this question. I want to back it up with some theory, and then we'll round this out with a little bit of a summary and draw the threads together in hopefully an interesting and valuable way. So let's think about how the web has evolved. So in my working life, we've broadly speaking gone from a web the size of a directory where you could broadly imagine mapping out the entire web, and you could navigate the hierarchy of that directory to find the thing you wanted on the web. Obviously, very quickly outgrew that scale, and the majority of my working life has been spent in the search era, where we've relied on the Oracle. Right? We've relied on going to mainly Google, but going to a search engine and searching for, in an information retrieval sense, the document on the web that most matches our search query in relevance, authority, trustworthiness, and the like. We're now entering, or arguably, I would argue, we have entered the agent era. And this is the reason I think we're already in this era is very similar to my argument that the biggest AI channel is already regular Google, is that Google itself has already moved on from that information retrieval mindset of saying, let's return the documents that are the closest match to the search query. And they've long ago moved to this more semantic idea of what's the best result for the query. And we're going even further down that rabbit hole. And we're getting to the point where it may not have a great deal to do with textual matching anymore. We're not searching in a classic sense. We are asking this agent to recommend websites that we're likely to be interested in based on our query or our needs. And so probably the most exciting bit about this is that the agent era heralds the return of competition to the search space. And I'm, in general, a fan of competition in all markets. And for too long, we haven't had it in search. And I think it's going to be very healthy. And so over the last 20, 25 years, whatever it is now, we've seen Google, first of all, become dominant by understanding their own algorithm, moving from their first academic breakthrough, their first insight in PageRank, which was this realization that by using links as votes, essentially, they could produce a much, much higher quality search engine than any of their competitors at the time. They layered on top of that a lot of information retrieval best practices that already existed. They invented their own, did their own research, and came up with their own information retrieval improvements and PageRank improvements. And they did a whole load of tweaking. And I think this is where some of their dominance came from, is because of the scale that they were at and the amount of data they had. Their tweaking was faster, more effective, and more confident than anyone else. And so they ended up with better search results as a consequence of that. But what it did mean was every single bit of this was in the algorithm they understood. Their engineers could debug why any particular website outranked any other particular web page for any query. And they knew the answers to those questions. We didn't necessarily, but they had access to that data. That has changed and is changing. And in particular, Amit Singhal left Google in 2016, so almost a decade ago. And with him, I think, I'm slightly oversimplifying, left the idea that core ranking should be understandable by humans. He was philosophically of the view that they should be able to do that kind of debugging. When he left, they moved on to this model of allowing machine learning and deep learning into the core organic algorithm. And so ever since then, we've been moving more and more towards this world of agent recommendations. And so we're in Jeff Dean's world now, and they have this vision of a more personalized, more intelligent, more sophisticated Google search that recommends things to you, knows more about you, knows what you want. And I'm not going to go down too far into to what extent they have already achieved this or have even taken a step backwards in some areas of search quality. But there's definitely a clear vision of what that could look like, arguably should look like in their world. And that's not to say that they don't face threats. I think there are some very severe and interesting threats actually right now. Not the topic of today's presentation, but just to cover them off very quickly, I think they face a threat from the slop of machine learning generated content filling the web with nonsense. I should emphasize the web is already full of nonsense. Humans have been pretty good at filling it with nonsense. Computers have been pretty good at filling it with nonsense for a long time. But this is slightly better than some of the spam we've seen in previous years, harder to differentiate from pure spam. And the challenge is that it's in the uncanny valley. It's nearly good enough. It's harder to tell the difference between slop and good content, whereas spam was easier to differentiate. But it's not good enough to actually make your users happy. And so I think that's a big threat. I think there's another threat that not just Google faces, but that all of the models face, which is a scarcity or a potential loss of untainted training data. By untainted, I mean not full of ML slop. And I've used this analogy before, but I think of this as being like the demand that there has been for pre-World War II steel, that the medical industry has found value in finding old battleships, pre-World War II battleships, raising them from the ocean and using that steel or that iron and that steel to make medical instruments because it's untainted by the nuclear testing and nuclear fallout that came in the years following the Second World War. And that kind of historic iron and steel became in demand. And I think we have a similar concept of anything that was written before LLMs got good, we know wasn't written by LLMs. Now, anything might be, right? A book might be, a magazine article might be, a news article might be. And that threat that you can lead to information collapse. And I'm sure there's a lot of research going on in this area. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to spend very long on this. Point is, those are two threats. There's also the threat of, this is a more Google-centric one, losing control of their own search quality because they don't actually know how their own algorithm works. Yeah, I'm not going to get too deep into this because this is about what we as marketers should do, not what Google should do. The consequence of all of this that I think is important to our strategic and tactical approach is that we need to ultimately, at some point, we're going to have a view on whether the growth of machine learning is a sustaining or a disruptive innovation when it comes to Google in particular. So a sustaining innovation would be one that benefits Google ultimately. These improve existing products, make them better and more valuable. A disruptive innovation, the classic under Clayton Christensen's model, are innovations which are good enough, probably less good in certain ways, but are different and better in interesting ways. Classically, that would be more affordable and more accessible. And because they're good enough, they get that foothold, that toehold against the existing incumbents and end up disrupting them. And classic examples of digital cameras or whatever, which started out worse than film cameras, but were better in interesting ways and ended up displacing the film camera. Not only displacing the film camera, but displacing the companies who made film cameras in many cases. And we can get into the details of that. But we need to have some view of this. And my view right now, and this might change, is that this stuff is a sustaining innovation for Google. This looks more like improvements to core Google search. That's not to say that they're going to win the chatbot battle necessarily. I think some of that is different to the job to be done for search, whereas the search battle, including AI overviews and when it's the right answer, having a chat-like interface when we're searching for things, I think Google potentially benefits in that area. There's some evidence of this, Google being the place that invented the attention is all you need. The paper that kicked off the current LLM revolution is not guaranteed. Kodak were among the first to invent digital photography, so that didn't work out great for them. So we don't know, but my view right now is that we should treat it as sustaining. And then the other interesting question is speed. And I mentioned Tyler Cowen earlier in reference to the greatest economist of all time, the Goat book. This was the interview that I was referring to, interviewed by Dwalkesh. It's a phenomenal interview. highly recommend a watch. It's quite long, it's an hour long, but I tend to listen to these things at 2x. So if you're a bit crazy like me, then it's only half an hour. Highly recommend this interview. One of the big topics they get into is how soon should we expect AI to really disrupt the world of work and our economies, governments, and everything. And Tyler is a very smart guy who thinks very deeply across a broad range of things, real polymath. And he won me over with an argument that he is basically an optimist in believing that this stuff is going to be powerful and effective. And he believes it's going to take quite some time to make a significant difference to productivity or the world of work. And he has some pretty good arguments. I'm not going to rehash them all here, but it involves listening to the experts in each area. So the experts in AI think it's going to be very powerful. The experts in the adoption of new technologies think it's going to be relatively slowly adopted. Not, it might be the fastest technology ever in its growth curve for ChatGPT or whatever, but in terms of revolutionizing what we do, that growth curve takes a long time and has done for literally every technology in human history. And there's no reason to think that this one's necessarily going to be faster. So anyway, I'm not doing a good job of articulating his viewpoint, but if you disagree with me, go and listen to that first, and then we should have a discussion about it. But the point being that I think it's going to be over the medium term horizon, this is going to be broadly good for Google, good for e-commerce, and slower to revolutionize things than we might at first predict. None of this is guaranteed, obviously, but some little data sources that point in this direction. Sundar, CEO at Google, talking about how year over year they've sent more and more traffic outside of Google, and that's not just paid traffic for sure. We'll come on to that in a second, as well as the relatively new head of Google Search, talking about the fact that AI overviews, in fact, can send more clicks than traditional web listings. And I can believe this stuff because a lot of people are thinking only in the first order effect of that one click, but you have to also think in the effect on query volume. If people do more searches because this stuff is better, more engaging, whatever it might be, you have to look at the total number of clicks, even if some of the click through rates decline. And my belief is that those total number of clicks are going to continue to increase. And so I've got the silly meme fallback handshake between Google and e-commerce, both like high commercial intent organic clicks. And in case it's not obvious, I am strongly of the opinion that Google likes this, that the only way Google can sell paid clicks is the existence of organic clicks. If every click was paid, it would be very hard to monetize that to the scale they have because there'd be far fewer of them. If users knew that every single click was an advert, then there'd be far fewer of those clicks. It only works because it's a fraction of a fraction of all clicks, a few percent of all clicks that are paid. And so Google needs tons of organic clicks in order for their business model to stack up. So this requires believing that it is a sustaining innovation that Google's business model is going to survive, which I do, at least over the short term, and that in that model, that implies large and growing numbers of organic search clicks. Google and e-commerce were aligned on this. So another few minutes, and then I'm happy to take a few questions if there's time. Feel free you can type them into the Riverside box. I think they feed through if you type them into the other streaming platforms as well. But let's do a quick rundown of a few things before I cover those off. So I said earlier that the large language models can't ship you stuff. And so that's why users are still going to want to at least reach PDPs, right? The product detail pages at least are going to have to continue to be things that are important. PLPs maybe less so, who knows? As I said, different implications for media, for affiliates and so forth. But we're talking today about e-commerce. I said earlier that we need freshness in order to be able to test, and I'm confident that the path flows towards freshness. We've seen it in every single important factor over the history, certainly of Google, but I think more broadly of the web. In the very early days, those who've been around the industry like me for a long time will remember the Google dance that you change things and you had to wait for Google to rerun the ranking algorithms for all the re-ranking for rankings to change. That's now close to real time. Indexing was the caffeine update. Again, that delay between something getting crawled and showing up in the index largely gone away. Quality signals. Panda was originally a batch process that ran occasionally. is now much more of a real-time process. We see more and more of these things moving into real time, and I think the same is going to be true. The analogy that I would draw here is to Bezos's bet. Bezos famously bet that what we know about, we may not know everything that's going to be true in a decade's time, but we know some things that are going to be true. We know that people are going to want low prices. We know they're going to want fast delivery. We know they're going to want vast selection. That's his bet, was that we may not know everything, but we know these things, or we can predict these things with high confidence. I think Sundar's equivalent bet would be something like, we know people want freshness, we know they want completeness, and we know they want relevance. And you put all of this together, you put to believe that the innovation in large language models is a sustaining innovation to Google, that Google wants to continue sending traffic to PDPs, and they're going to want the freshest, most up-to-date information about stock levels, pricing, reviews, all of those kinds of things. Put all of that together, and the one prediction I'm making today is that AI recommendations will continue to send people to product pages. By the time it's a significant fraction of search traffic, the need for freshness will mean that we'll be able to test to learn what works best in those areas. And I draw those threads together to say that, in summary, before a person could buy from you in the future, a machine has to recommend you. And this is arguably already somewhat true. And these machine preferences are emulating humans, right? They're human-like in certain degrees. And so my argument is that we're going to need hypothesis-driven testing. So I'm going to answer a question or two and then just round out with a few links to interesting places to follow up for more information. But if folks have to drop off, I will be sharing the recording and the slides with anybody who pre-registered, who's on the email. If you didn't pre-register, then stick around to the end and I'll share the link again for you to make sure that you get those. So yeah, we had a couple of questions. I had some questions about publishers, which I'm not going to take right now, actually, because I want to keep this focused on e-commerce and retail. But if that's you who asked me, then let's follow up on, I can answer that on Twitter or LinkedIn. So that will be fine. How much of this are we already doing at Search Pilot? How does the tool give a competitive edge? Well, all of the Google element, right? So we're already testing for all sources of organic Google traffic. And we do that in a blended way right now, but we're looking at first the ways of splitting out different forms of Google traffic. And then further down the line, as I've argued here, when the freshness makes it possible, we will be very interested in any form of organic. And one of the things I'm most excited about is competition in the search space. And so, yeah, as I said, the first page of my report, if I were asked to produce this for senior leadership at large retail or large e-commerce player, is our AI SEO strategy, AI search strategy starts with Google right now because they are the behemoth in the room. And that's all about testing. In my opinion. There's a question about shipping, which yes, I literally mean it in the most literal sense. Although I will follow that link that somebody shared in the chat, which is about. But I do mean fulfillment essentially, because fulfillment is needed. That this is a good thing. That all of these developments are ultimately a good thing for retailers. Somebody has to do that bit, the real world bit. And I personally remain bullish on the website element of that. Could be app based, but broadly speaking, people need to see these things and they need to see it from you and they need to trust that you're the right person to buy it from before they go ahead and purchase that thing. Of course, this is before, money becomes not a thing anymore and the entire basis of civilization changes. But as I said from the Tyler Cowen interview, I'm thinking that is probably some way off. One quick, I think maybe last question. There's some others in here that I will try and follow up with on. Let me just take a quick note of those. I'll try and follow up with some of these on Twitter and LinkedIn afterwards. But one important question somebody's asked: what do we mean by hypothesis-driven testing, and how is it different from normal testing? What I mean by hypothesis-driven testing is it's just a particular form of it where we're not just throwing things at the wall. It's based on this belief that there is something underlying the reason why things are the way they are. So a hypothesis-driven conversion rate test wouldn't just be trying all different colors of a button. It would be saying we've done some user research and we know that one of the reasons that people are sometimes hesitant to buy from us is that they don't know our returns policy. If we put a little bit of text next to the checkout button that says returns are free within 30 days, click here for more information, we believe more people will buy from us. That will be an example of a hypothesis-driven conversion rate test. in SEO, you can do the same thing. So instead of just changing things because they're best practices or because somebody thought of them, you have some hypothesis that either it aligns with user intent. So we think this will be important because it's going to improve how users, end users of Google and the website benefit, or because we have some kind of more information retrieval type hypothesis, or it could come from many places. But the point is that there is that hypothesis that says we're going to run this experiment because we believe that something might be true. And the benefit of it is that not only do you get the win when the statistics come out in your favor, but you've also learned something. And so even if it's negative, or sometimes even if it's inconclusive, you've learned something as well. Um, that's probably a topic for a deeper dive another day. I'm conscious that some folks will need to wrap up, so I'm going to quickly just run through some where you can get some more information on this. So, quick reminder: what we've got. We care about how customers are using AI to find things to buy. We're talking today about what retail marketers do right now, about things like AI overviews, ChatGPT, and so forth. But I said, let's start with the punchline. Let's also end with the punchline. The way I would recommend this is to say we need to think firstly about what we should be doing right now, and that has to be based on channels as they exist today. We need to be thinking about what's coming next. So, how do we position ourselves for the next planning period? And we need to pay some attention to where this is going eventually, not necessarily because we start those activities right now, but to make sure that we're aware of everything that's coming down the pipe. And the summary of my recommendation is that what ties all of this together is realizing that we're increasingly in a world of agents where people are asking for those recommendations. And so before that person ends up buying from you, certainly for new customer acquisition, a machine has to have recommended you. And those machines have preferences, and we can test against those preferences. So if you want more of this, there's more at searchpilot.com. We have a ton of information if you go to use cases and retail, lots of information about how SEO is changing and working in that sense. We cover all the things I've talked about this is kind of what modern SEO looks like, as well as some test results that I know SEO geeks in particular always want to know. Now, but what about titles? What about descriptions? What about schema? Whatever. We've got the answers. We've got you hooked up on that. If you want to get this stuff by email, we have what we call the flight log, which is a regular email that gives you everything you need to know. You can scan this QR code or follow the bit.ly link. You don't have to do that right this second, though, because if you want to get all of these links, best thing is to make sure that you've signed up to get the slides. If you want to speak to us about actually using SearchPilot at your company, you can head to the website and get a demo or see the tool online at searchpilot.com. So follow these links for that. A nice little quote from partners and customers at Marks and Spencer who are doing some very exciting work in this area, and you can read about that on our website as well. I've enjoyed running through this today. I hope you've found something useful. Please do follow up with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or hit me up by email if you would like to dive deeper into anything we talked about today.